one of the biggest questions I receive are, which hormones should I be testing?
Yeah.
And it's usually followed by, where do they come from? Like, where do hormones even come from?
Right.
So let's actually start at those two guideposts, and then we can. Dr. Carrie Jones, welcome to the podcast for what I hope is going to be a full conversation this time. Last time we were chatting, the internet gods were not on our side, so I'm so happy that you were able to come back and redo this.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, because we were in the middle of such a great conversation, and then I was at a cabin in the mountains, and I should have known better, and all of a sudden I was gone. My internet was like, nope, not today, sorry.
It's funny. It was like that awkward pause where you're like, okay, she's going to come back. She's going to come back.
Yeah.
I'm like, nope, she's gone.
I felt that too. Yeah. I was literally running around the cabin like, can I get any Wi-Fi anywhere? No. Okay.
That's all right. We're going to do it we're going to do it proper today. So what I was saying last time, and I'll say it again here, is I wanted you on the podcast because you are such a powerhouse when it comes to hormones, to the metabolism of hormones, and this is complicated stuff. And you have such a gift in the way that you describe certain pathways, the way that you make it really easily understandable for whether it's a layperson or a practitioner who is wanting to learn from you. So I think that this is going to be a really robust conversation. And we're going to talk about, I was saying in the pre-chat, like I want to talk about estrogens, I want to talk about testosterones, and then we'll kind of see how far we can get, because even just those two topics are quite meaty in and of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I always like origin stories, like I was saying. And for many women, or just many practitioners who get into hormones, myself included, like my period was my nemesis. And no matter how punitive I was and controlling I was just not as strong and as powerful as my hormones were. So I would love, as much as I'd like to think I could like overcome them, they all showed me every single month who was the boss. So I would love for my listeners to understand a little bit more about you, what led you into your work with the field of hormones, and what you do with it currently. What you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would plan to go to conventional medical school. I was in my undergrad, I was a biology pre-med major, and I was working for two different hospitals. And one hospital was in the pediatric wing, and the other hospital was in their community outreach wing. And I loved the community outreach part. I was working with these two nurses, and that was my favorite thing, was going out and educating. And in the pediatric wing, it was very cold and stark and sterile and not the route I wanted to go. And the more I was watching following doctors as part of my, pre-med program, I thought, this is not the medicine I want to go into. I'd always known I wanted to be in women's health. I'd always known, I thought maybe OBGYN. I did think pediatrics for a little while, which is why I was in the pediatric wing. And I thought, nope, this isn't it. I can't do conventional medicine. So I ended up moving to Portland, Oregon. I was in Ohio at the time. I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I found the naturopathic college, or it found me, depending how you look at it. And I worked there for 2 years. And then I thought, this is where I was supposed to go to school. And I did most of my mentoring was in women's health and hormones. And my residency was in women's health and hormones. And then subsequently, when I got into practice, that's what I was really attracted to. I just continued to love gynecology, women's health, women's endocrinology, and hormones. And I find it really fascinating. Growing up, my periods were not great. I can remember being on a trip in the Virgin Islands, and I couldn't go on the catamaran trip because my pain was so bad and I was throwing up and I had a headache with my family. And so, but what really got me into hormones was the amount of women who just didn't know hormones. Like the amount of women who I would learn all this stuff, and I would tell my non-clinical friends, and they would go, oh, I had no idea. Oh, I didn't know that. Is that how that works? I was like, gosh, we have been failed as women. So
yeah.
That's
it's
really
like our hands are over our
me.
ears.
Yeah.
Like during class, it's like, la, 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 don't talk about it.
Yeah. And even as I have women, and I'm sure you do too, in their 40s, 50s, 60s that write me and go, I am a full-grown adult woman who've had children. I have grandchildren. I didn't know that. I didn't know that's how my body worked. And I'm like, a lot of women don't. We just don't get that education, and that's what I'm here for.
It's so interesting to hear you say, the naturopathic college or the naturopathic profession chose me, because that's a similar. I have a very similar feeling, because I have a very similar parallel with you in that I wanted to maybe go into pediatrics. I was thinking maybe pediatrician, something along those lines, and then was volunteering at a hospital very similar to you in the NICU. And after a week, I was like, screw this. Like I do not have the backbone for this, and literally, and then went to, and figuratively maybe, and then went to start volunteering at chiropractic offices. And I was like, wow, this is a really different way to approach healthcare, where it's much more whole person centered, more vitalistic. And that's what I ended up doing at going to the chiropractic school. And then, with naturopathy and chiropractic, they're sort of like, twins, right? Or sister, I'll say they're sisters
Yeah,
in terms of
sisters. Yeah.
their philosophy, in terms of how we care for patients. So it's lovely to hear that. And just for, let's start with probably the most common question that I know I get, and I assume because you are, someone who focuses especially on your social media channels and being the medical advisor. We should also mention that you are also the medical advisor currently of
Yes.
Precision Analytical,
Analytical.
which is the Dutch test. Let's talk about first, for a woman who has never done any testing before. One of the biggest questions I receive are, which hormone should I be testing?
Yeah.
And it's usually followed by, where do they come from? Like, where do hormones even come from?
Right.
So let's actually start at those two guideposts, and then we can get into some of the specifics around estrogens and testosterones.
And I love this question too, because, I've said this before, a couple of years ago, my mom, who is my biggest fan, said to me, I love reading all your social media, but I don't always understand it. In fact, I don't even really know what a hormone is. And I was like, well, I failed. Yeah. I have failed. My mom has no idea what a hormone is. Oh my goodness. So hormones are basically just messengers, right? They're basically little signals that get sent out from various glands in the body to usually to do something, to turn something on, activate something, catapult something. That's what a hormone does. We have lots of areas of our body that make hormones. We call them glands. So we have adrenal glands, we have thyroid gland, we have the pancreas, we have ovaries, men have testicles. So we have glands in our brain that make the original signaling hormone that goes downstream. And so we have all these glands, and they communicate with each other like, my teenagers do on Snapchat all day long, to figure out how to move yourself forward, how to handle your fatigue, how to get your cycle regulated, how to deal with temperature, how to, handle your hair, your skin, your heart, your blood sugar. I mean, your bones, they literally handle everything in your body. So when women say, I feel hormonal, what hormone should I test? Usually when it's related to their cycle, their period, they're talking about estrogen and progesterone. That's usually what they're talking about. So estrogen and progesterone follows a rhythm. For women who are still getting the menstrual cycle or are of an age, they should still be cycling. The estrogen, progesterone go up and down a little bit like a roller coaster, but it's supposed to be literally like a roller coaster on a track. Like, it's a set track. It goes up and down every month. So when we test hormones, we're looking for women predominantly at testing them in the second half of their cycle. So if your period is day one, the first day you bleed is day one, most women generally get their hormones checked days 19, 20, 21, because we're at a certain point on the roller coaster track, and it's a very set point. We know the reference ranges for that point. We know what to expect at that point, and that's why we test there. Now, it's not set in stone for every woman. Because some women have longer cycles, women have shorter cycles. Some people don't cycle at all, and they can't figure out what's going on. And so we just have to adjust the testing days a little bit.
Right. And that's now, for testing specifically, or would you say that's true across the board?
Across the board. Saliva, blood testing. Women are listening to this and go, oh, you know what? I have a OBGYN appointment tomorrow. Can I ask for a blood test can I get my estrogen and progesterone tested? Yeah, you can. Just make sure you're at the right part of your cycle. Make sure you talk to your practitioner about where you are in your cycle and if that's the appropriate day to test. Now, we have other hormones that we talk about, right? I don't have a sex drive, or, I have my hair's falling out. And so those other hormones like thyroid, testosterone, cortisol, DHEA, we can actually test them whenever, kind of when you feel your worst, we can test them. They're not so cycle related. And we tend to make it easier for women test them all at once. One day, why not just knock it out? But other women will say, well, actually, I feel the worst on this day. Can I test cortisol this day? Or can I test my thyroid this day? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. It's not so set in stone.
So the first thing for anyone listening is to track your cycle, right? Because
Yes.
that's going to give you, and that I mean, I'm sure that you know that you would be amazed at how many women I speak to that they have no idea how long
The,
their cycle is. They
yeah.
don't track. They don't know. It's like, oh yeah, it's here. Like, okay, I guess I'm bleeding now, and like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm not bleeding anymore, and now probably in about a month.
Yeah.
There's no tracking, and that's
Yeah.
really, if there's any takeaway, that's like the first thing, right? Because then you
Mm-hmm.
really do get to understand the differences in terms of your mood, your energy, your sleep,
Mm-hmm.
your all the things that you were saying, and to
Mm-hmm.
really get to understand yourself and your own personal hormonal milieu, whatever that looks
Mm-hmm.
like for you. Yeah.
Right. Right. And I'll be honest, like I track, I have an app on my phone that I track my cycle, and I'm aware when I ovulate, I can feel it.
Mhm.
But I was somewhere, and I think probably with a group of friends, and they were like, oh, how long is your cycle? And I was like, well, I'm very consistent, 28 days. And I pulled up my app, and my app gives me an average, like what your average days are. And it said 26. And I was like, when did I lose 2 days? And why
Yeah.
didn't I know? So apparently I'm a 26-day girl instead of a 28-day girl. So even
Nice.
it gets to the best of us.
So let's talk a little bit about, well, actually, before we even get into estrogen, let's just contrast. Because we've mentioned blood, salivary,
Mm-hmm.
urine.
Urine.
What are the differences between these tests? Like, why would we opt for a Dutch test, a dried urine test, versus going to the doctor and getting a blood draw or taking a salivary sample? What are some of the differences between those three?
So the big one is ease of collection. Can you do it at home, and the information that you get? So the blood test, of course, has been around forever. It's very common. Insurance generally covers it. But it gives you an in the moment. So I want to know my estrogen right now. I want to know my estradiol, which is the most potent right now. I want to know my testosterone right now. So you can go to the lab, you get a blood draw, and you get your number. The bonus of saliva and subsequently dried urine is that you get to do it at home. So you don't have to go in a lab, which for a lot of people right now, they don't want to go into a hospital. They don't want to
Right.
go into a blood draw center. And the other bonus is that we can collect multiple times in a day when it's saliva or when it's urine. So they can, for example, cortisol. Maybe you want to know what your cortisol rhythm is through the whole day. So you'll collect in the morning. You'll collect a couple hours later, you'll collect around dinner and before bed. So now we see a bigger picture. We see a bigger pattern of what's going on. Hard to get a blood draw 4 times in the day. Not many people really want to go do that.
Right.
On top of it, now we have urine. We have dried urine, which dried sounds funny, but really it's just you're urinating on these pieces of filter paper, letting the paper dry, and then mail them back. So it's just something simple like that. The added benefit of the urine is not only do you get those hormones and you get the ability to do it at home and throughout the day, but you also get what we call pathways or metabolites. So you draw an estrogen or testosterone, and I can tell you where it goes. So women will say, I am scared of estrogen. I have all these symptoms. What are my risks? And the nice part of the dried urine is I can say, well, there's some pathways you go down. Some are better than others. And let's see where you go and what your risks are. Same for testosterone. Women say, I'm getting cystic acne on my jawline. I'm having some hair loss at my temples. What could be going on? We do dried urine. I'll say, okay, here's your testosterone, and it's going down the pathway that actually causes cystic acne and hair loss. Let's get you off the pathway. So with dried urine, you just get a lot more information beyond just a blood draw with the convenience of doing it at home.
Yeah, and the way I like to compare that is like the blood draw is almost like a picture. Like you take a picture on your phone, it's like a
Yes.
moment in time. The
Yes.
Dutch test or a dried urine, as you're saying, and even if you're taking salivary, if you're doing a 24-hour
Mm-hmm.
cortisol salivary test, then it's
Mm-hmm.
like a video on. Like there's much more context. There's you get a little bit more color. What's happening? Why it's happening? When it's
Yeah.
happening? So there's a lot more information there for either a clinician or the individual to be able to parse through.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And especially cortisol is a really big one, especially now everyone is so stressed out, understandably. And if you get a blood draw with cortisol, what people don't realize is that the blood draw with cortisol is kind of like everything cortisol. So it's what we call free cortisol. Free is what's actually active and can bind to receptors and do the things. And then it's what we call bound up cortisol. And so let's say your blood draw result is 20. Well, what you don't know is that that's 19 cortisols bound up, which means they can't do anything, and only one that's free, or maybe it's 19 that are free and active and causing you anxiety, and one that's bound up. And so the saliva and the dried urine actually parses that apart, and now we can actually see more comprehensive for people. So many a time people go, oh gosh, I got my cortisol drawn this morning in the blood, and it's so low or it's so high. I'm like, well, I mean, that's like that's a percentage of the answer. So let's give you some extra information, especially around cortisol, especially right now with everyone running on fight or flight.
100%. Yeah. And, maybe I want to talk about cortisol today because one of the things that everyone's stressed out. Sleep is affected. I mean, your hair is affected, ladies, your hair, if you're noticing that your hair is falling out in clumps, like that's usually an indication that, well, there could be other things like thyroid and stuff, but cortisol is usually a really big player there. So I want to make sure that we circle back to that.
Sure. Absolutely.
All right. Let's start with estrogen because she's like that's the phenotypic, female hormone. And just like women through the ages, she has been misunderstood and vilified.
Yes,
right?
Poor estrogen.
Poor estrogen. So I want to set the record straight with her. Let's actually start where estrogens are made in the body. And then I want to sort of go into it's not just one estrogen we're talking about, it's estrogens because she comes with she's like a
girl gang. She is a girl gang.
She's Charlie's Angels, right?
Yes.
Yeah, she's a girl gang. Yeah, okay.
She is a girl gang. Yeah. So estrogen. So the main estrogen in the body is called E2 or estradiol. It's the most potent for women. Well, men too, but for women, and it's primarily made in the ovaries. And so on our ovaries we have these things called follicles. Follicles contain the egg that you're going to ovulate, hopefully every month. And on each follicle are cells that help you make estrogen. They help you make predominantly estradiol or E2. And then interestingly enough, you can also make estrogens in your fat tissue. So there's a nifty little enzyme called aromatase, and it will convert your testosterone or other hormones like DHEA into estrogen as well. So as women get more adipose tissue, then they could be at risk for making higher amounts of estrogen. When women go into menopause, their ovaries do not make estrogen anymore because they're menopausal. And then the body primarily relies on that fat conversion into estrogen. So it's not like, I know women, of course, a lot of women are always freaking out about weight gain, the amount of fat that they have, but it does help us make estrogen. And estrogen is so important to our brain health and our bone health, our hair health, our skin health, our mood. I mean, it really does lot when it's in balance.
Yeah. Like one of the things, it's like, I sort of say this in jest, but there's a time in our cycle when testosterone is really high. And there's also right before ovulation, we see like that large, rise in estrogen. That's when estrogen is trophic. It is a growth fat. And that is when we want to be lifting heavy weights because it's also going to impact bone density, muscle, hypertrophy as well. We can talk about some of the, solutions like resistance training and whatnot. But I want to really go through how estrogen is utilized and metabolized in the body. So we talked about the girl gang. So now we know estrogen comes from our adipose tissue or our fat, and primarily in our reproductive years from our ovaries. So now we are at the girl gang part. So what happened? So what are the three girls? And then let's talk about, we can maybe even move into phase 1 or the hydroxylate, like the first phase of estrogen metabolism. What happens there?
Yeah. So the other estrogens are E1, which are estrone, and then E3, which is estriol. And estriol is interesting because estriol is really important for vaginal health. It's really important to prevent vaginal dryness. But when you read about estriol, in fact, I think it's Wikipedia calls it a metabolic waste product. I'm like, oh no, it's so sad. Like we actually need estriol. But what it means is once you make estriol, it's done. Like then it then moves out the body. So E1, E2, and E3 are kind of our main estrogens we hear about all the time. Because E3 is quote unquote a metabolic waste product, it does its own form of detoxification. When we're talking about estrogen detox, primarily we're talking about the first two, E1 estrone and E2 estradiol. So when you make an estrogen, you use your estrogen, and now you need to be done with your estrogen, or maybe you take estrogen and you need to get rid of your estrogen. Where does it go? So it goes through detoxification. We also call it metabolism. And there's three main phases. So phase one, as you said, that we test for is hydroxylation. So basically you're taking your estrogen and you're beginning the process of converting it down into a form that you can safely excrete, you can safely get rid of. So it first changes it into what we call phase one detoxification. So you have three options. Again, lots of options. A lot of estrogen girl gang sub members. So you have what's called a 2-hydroxy, because it's hydroxylation is the name of the detox pathway. So 2-hydroxy, you have 4-hydroxy, and 16-hydroxy. They're numbered. So 2, 4, 16. So estrogen will always go down all three of them to some degree. But we want to prefer the 2 pathway. So the 2 pathway is less carcinogenic. It's not no carcinogenic. It's not, has zero risk. It has a little bit of risk, but less carcinogenic, meaning less cancer causing. The 16 pathway is what we call the proliferative pathway. It makes things grow. It's estrogenic. So think bone health, good for bones. Maybe not so great for women with heavy periods and clots and fibroids, tender breasts. 16 can get a little crazy there. The 4 pathway is the concerning pathway. The 4 pathway is the one that has the increased risk for DNA damage. And of course, if the DNA gets damaged and our DNA repair system can't fix it fast enough, that's when we get into maybe some increased risk for cancer. We call it mutation. So problems with our DNA. Mm-hmm. So estrogen goes through down one of these 3 pathways. So our goal with our diet and our lifestyle and our choices is to prefer the 2 pathway and minimize as much as we can the 4 pathway. So that's all phase one. Those 3 pathways are all phase one options.
And then there's a certain genetic predisposition that we have here as well, right? Is there certain, because we have the genes like CYP1A1
Yep.
is and CYP1B1. So do we have a certain, and I know that we can influence it through, some of the foods that we eat and mm-hmm. supplements and so forth. But is there more of a genetic predisposition? Is it worth knowing what those things are?
I think it is worth knowing as a woman. So I just got mine redone. I've had, and my 1B1, interestingly, I have a fast CYP1B1. So 1B1 is what pushes the 4 pathway, mm-hmm. whereas 1A1 and 1A2, it's like it's like the A game pathway. That pushes the 2 pathway. So you want more A and a little less B. And I have more B. My B is fast. And so, but when I test, when I do my Dutch test, it doesn't manifest for me like that. So I'm doing the diet, the lifestyle choices to minimize my B pathway, which is the 4 pathway, and upregulate my 2 pathway. So even though I have the preference for the bad pathway, I can easily change that. So I think as women, I think it's really important to know this, at least know where your pathways are at. So even if you're like, I don't want to pay for DNA testing right now, like that's kind of expensive, or that's overwhelming, or I'm not sure how to do that. At least understand where you are in your pathways, because whether it's genetic or not, we can do great things to help, push you onto a better pathway, which is really nice.
I love that you're saying this too, because it's like, I don't know who said it, so I'm not gonna be able to attribute it. So if anybody knows it, but it's like it's the genetics that load the gun, the mm-hmm. epigenetics that pull the trigger. So so I am actually the same as you, Carrie. I mean, we seem to be sisters here. My genetics, my CYP1B1 is very fast. I tend to like that 4OH mm-hmm. pathway, the DNA damaging, quinone producing pathway. But because I do the lifestyle, as you said, there's mm-hmm. lots of movement, there's lots of stress reduction as much as I can right now. There's the nutrition, all those things mm-hmm. that when I do testing, when I do the Dutch, I don't show that up. I don't show up
right
to be 4OH dominant. And just to give a breakdown, so when we're looking at those pathways, about 2, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the 2OH one, about 70% of our estrogen going down that pathway, correct?
Yeah. Ideally,
Ideally 10% for the 4OH.
A little bit, like it's like 14%-ish. Mm-hmm.
14%, and then
or less. I mean, it doesn't have to be exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and then the fill would be 16OH, like whatever's left over there. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, that's hydroxylation. That's phase 1 that happens.
Phase 1.
in the liver. So again, liver health is also very important. Moving into conjugation or phase two, this is essentially like the way I like to describe this is like a relay race. Like this is really when you're basically making those metabolites that you produced in phase one, you're making them more water soluble for either renal or biliary excretion.
Clearance. Yep.
Yeah. So a couple different ways that you can do this. Methylation, which I want to do a little geeky magic carpet ride on with you. Glutathionization, and the one I can never say properly, glucuronidation.
Glucuronidation. Yes.
Yes. All right. So let's talk about methylation, and let's talk about, and this is what I mean when I say it's like a bit like a relay. I used to run relay, so this makes sense to me. Like it's basically like punting the baton to the next runner. So let's talk about why methylation is so important and how that can affect, if you have poor methylation, how that can affect estrogen metabolism.
So just like you said, now you have all these phase one, what we call metabolites, right? So your estrogen are converted into one of them, a 2, a 4, a 16. So the 2 or the 4 have to get what we call neutralized. And just like you said, water soluble. So everyone thinks methylation and they go, oh, right, MTHFR. I'm like, no, actually, it's the enzyme COMT or COMT. That's the enzyme that's the big player here. It's the COMT enzyme that is the methyl donor to neutralize the estrogen. Now, MTHFR and folate play a role in the big picture, but really what we're looking at is what's called the methionine cycle. So it's where homocysteine becomes methionine. And then after methionine, you make SAM. A lot of people maybe are familiar with the supplement SAMe, S-A-M-E, SAMe. And then that is a cofactor, helps with COMT, and the cycle goes back around again. So they're known as methyl transferases. Like I said, they put the methyl on, and by putting the methyl on, it neutralizes it, and it's now ready to be excreted out of the body, either through your kidneys, out in the urine, or through your liver, gallbladder, and then into the intestines and out as stool. So the healthier your methylation is, the healthier that methionine cycle is, the healthier your COMT enzyme is, which could be fast or slow, depending on your genetics and depending on lifestyle stuff, then the better off, hopefully, your estrogen detoxification will be.
Good. And I want to talk about COMT because I have, and one of the things I love specifically about the Dutch test is even if you don't have your genetics, because like you were saying, like maybe you don't want to get the genetics, or you don't know how, you don't have a functional provider who can, parse through the information with you, you can actually get a sense of how efficient your COMT gene is by looking at the ratio. Because in the Dutch test, you have a ratio, you have the 2-OH, and you can look at that versus 2-methoxy estrogen. So if you have if you have a lot of 2-OH and not a lot of the 2-methoxy estrogen, you can kind of infer that maybe there's a bit of backup in the system, right? Like maybe COMT is a little bit slower.
Yeah. And so my analogy is a bathtub. It's always been a bathtub. So if you think of your bathtub, water in your bathtub, a drain, and then connected to your sewer line out of your house. So phase 1 estrogen is the water coming into your bathtub. What kind of water is it? How fast is your water? How slow is your water? Phase 2 is your drain. So that's your COMT, right? Is your drain open? Is your drain closed? Is your drain open, but it's not open wide enough because there's so much water coming into the system? And then phase 3, which we'll get to, that's the sewer line out of the house, which is literally your intestines. Body. And so it's this. So if you have, just like you said, if you have a lot of phase 1 estrogen, a lot of water coming into your bathtub, but your drain is clogged or your drain is half open, then you're going to overflow into your bathroom, right? Which causes damage. It's the same in your body. If you have an overflow of those phase 1 estrogens, you're going to cause damage in the body. So we want that drain to be nice and open, nice and healthy before we do anything with the water.
And what are some ways? So if you're looking at the Dutch test or you have your genetic info and you're like, okay, my COMT is really slow. Like for me, I'm heterozygous. So I'm kind of like a medium.
Me too.
My COMT is not super fast. It's not super slow. It's just in the middle. What are some ways that we can upregulate or help to support that gene in doing its job?
So the two big cofactors are, like I said, SAM, which a lot of people know the supplement SAMe, but do be careful with SAMe. But magnesium is the other big cofactor for COMT. And then I have read that zinc, the nutrient zinc, can act in the place of magnesium like 60 to 70% of the time. And I think a lot of the world is magnesium deficient and zinc deficient, just for a lot of reasons. And by not having those just basic nutrients, you're going to have a much slower COMT. Now, unfortunately, also being estrogen dominant, having high estrogen also slows down COMT. And so even if you have a fast COMT, if you have a lot of estrogen, or maybe you're taking estrogen, too much estrogen, you can slow your own enzyme down. So we want to work to at least get your own estrogen, back in balance and improve your COMT status. There are other cofactors, folate being one of them. Like I said, MTHFR is a part of it. Vitamin B12, the methyl or hydroxy B12 can be really helpful. Choline, phosphatidylcholine, glycine, trimethylglycine, which is also known as betaine, methionine, which you can take as a supplement. All these things, B6, so again, it's not earth-shattering expensive stuff. It's a lot of just nutrients we get from good diet, from vegetables and fruits grown in good soil, or sometimes we do need to supplement with quality supplements to get it back into our body to help the cycle go round and round.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, because sometimes I'm a big fan of supplementation, because I think that I want to have someone on the podcast to talk about regenerative agriculture and what's happening to our soils, because oftentimes I'll hear, well, I just want to get it from my diet. And while that is the utopia.
Noble.
It is noble.
That's noble.
Yes, I would like to as well.
Yeah.
But what we know, even with our organic produce, like, we are depleting the nutrients in our soil. And when you're using the soil over and over and over again, there's no time for rest. Or when you have a lot of crop dusting and all of that sort of starts to bleed into the soil and the runoff into the waters and stuff. I think that supplementation has become, the word supplement, it means to supplement an already clean diet. So if you're doing everything that you can in the nutrition realm, but I think that now it's almost like an insurance policy. Like, you just also should be taking it as well. You mentioned,
it's even just, I don't mean to cut you off, but even I don't have a green thumb at all. I can keep succulents alive and air plants. I have 2 air plants. But this year I thought, you know what? I'm a grown-up woman. I can grow tomatoes. Like, I can start a little garden right outside. So I started with tomatoes and peppers, and yay me, they grew, and I have all these tomatoes and peppers. And so, but what my husband and I say all the time is, I buy organic. I try to get as organic as possible with vegetables, especially the soft skin vegetables.
Yes.
And I can buy organic vegetables at my local store that comes from Oregon or Washington, which is where I'm from. And it doesn't taste the same as the organic tomatoes I pluck off my vine in my backyard. It's night and day difference, which tells me the nutrient content of what I'm growing in my backyard, just because I can pluck it off the vine and eat it right there, versus pluck it, package it, ship it, unpack it, I buy it. It just declines over time.
Right.
It's so crazy.
You mentioned magnesium. There are many different types of magnesium. Is there one that you like, or do you want? Can you get on that rabbit hole?
Yeah. So the cool thing about magnesium, so a lot of people go, which is the best magnesium? Magnesium glycinate, magnesium citrate, magnesium sulfate, oxide, L-threonate. And the other question I get is like, well, which one is magnesium? They're all magnesium, all of them. So magnesium glycinate is magnesium with a glycine attached. Magnesium sulfate is magnesium with a sulfate attached. That's like Epsom salt baths, or Epsom salts that you put in a bath. Magnesium citrate has, citrate attached. Oxide has oxygen attached. They're all going to get you some magnesium. Some will absorb better than others. And the general magnesium that has pretty good bioavailability and probably is not going to cause you a lot of diarrhea is magnesium glycinate. So that's the one that and you should generally take it later in the day, maybe at night, because the glycine is calming. And so if you have sleep issues, it might help with that. But it doesn't generally cause the loose stools effect. Now, if you are prone to constipation, then you may say, well, I like citrate because that helps me, move my bowels every morning. And that's an option as well.
And you take
I
it in the
personally
morning?
you can. I do glycinate at night, and I do 3 and 8, L3 and 8 in the morning. So L3 and 8 is a neat little molecule that gets magnesium across the blood-brain barrier. It gets
Yes.
magnesium into the brain and has been shown in studies to improve brain health. And so I take a capsule of that in the morning to cover all my bases, because I want the magnesium for sleep and for, sore muscles and, relaxation, but then I want my brain support in the morning. And I crave it. I know I'm magnesium deficient. One, I want all the dark chocolate in the world. And two, I feel so much better. And a lot of people say, if you crave a lot of dark chocolate, it's probably you're missing magnesium.
Mm.
And I feel so much better. I just know it when I take my magnesium.
Magnesium is better than diamonds for women. Like we need it. Like
Yeah.
like I think it's vitamin D and magnesium are the top two deficiencies that we see actually globally.
Yeah.
But this is particularly true. I mean, I'm in Toronto, so I'm further north than you, but we, the further, like the higher up you go, the more D you need, the more vitamin D you need, the more omega-3s you need, and of course, the more magnesium you need. So I'm so glad that we just stopped here for a moment, because I get this question a lot too. It's like, which magnesium? And they're all magnesium, but they have, depending on, what sister they've taken with them, what +1 they have, the ball, then, there's different outcomes there as well.
I call it magnesium's last name, like magnesium glycinate, magnesium citrate, like it's just magnesium and its last name.
Right. I love it. That's so good. So let's move into phase 3. This is excretion. This is when we've done good, like, the word can sometimes be a little off-putting for people, but this is when we get rid of estrogen. So walk us through how this happens.
So once you go through phase 2 detoxification, you are essentially an estrogen. This is how I vision it anyway, in a box with a lid on it with a bow tied on top. And so now you're going to excrete it somehow. And it's a lot of people do stool testing, right? A lot of people poop in a cup for science, and they want to see what's going on. And one of the reasons they do that, not just the parasites or candida or the microbiome, but there is an enzyme called beta glucuronidase. And what it does, if it's too high, is it will untie the bow and it will open the lid and it will let estrogen fly free, and it gets reabsorbed back into the system. So if you have an estrogen that's made it through phase 1 and it's made it through phase 2, and now it's in your intestines, earmarked to get shipped out in its little box, but then it gets reabsorbed, that could be a big part of your estrogen problem if you're struggling with a lot of estrogen issues. It could be right in the gut, because this enzyme is essentially acting like scissors and just cutting off that bow and opening up that lid. So now what we want to do is we want to do all the things we know for gut health, for microbiome health, for reducing inflammation and just improving the microbiome, and getting rid of any ride-alongs like parasites and candida and whatnot. Avoiding foods we know are inflammatory to us. I know there's a lot of I guess controversy around when people talk about food intolerances or food allergies, food sensitivities, and I'm like, all right, but you know when you eat a food and you shouldn't. Like my dad should not eat ice cream. He should not. I don't care if it's an allergy, sensitivity, or whatever it is. Ice cream is not my dad's friend. And so when it comes to GI health, I would tell, my dad was my patient, I would say, every time you eat ice cream, it completely hurts your intestinal tract, and that's going to affect your hormones. Same for women. I have women write me that go, I know I shouldn't eat corn, but I love popcorn or tortilla chips. I'm like, but it's not good for you. It hurts. And that's hurting your estrogen, among other things. But since we're talking about estrogen, it's potentially causing the estrogen to just get recirculated, and you're trying to get rid of it. So it's like you put the trash out and then somebody else just brought it back in. And you're like, no, you go out, and then it keeps getting brought back in.
Right. So what are some of the lifestyle interventions that that might be able to, that would throw that off? So we talk about food intolerances, or, and I agree with you. I think that innately or intuitively, if you're paying attention, when you eat something like Giovanni can't have potatoes, like it doesn't matter. He just can't do potatoes. So I think if you're paying attention to some of these foods that may be aggravating the gut, maybe there's some hyperpermeability or there's like inflammation, as you mentioned, what are some things maybe in our environment, if there's some environmental toxins, like, what are some
Yeah.
things that can influence that?
I mean, everything you said. So all the chemicals that we are exposed to, wear down on our gut permeability and affect, we have a mucus layer, that's very protective mucus layer in our intestines. And it's to buffer our, innermost intestinal layer that does all the absorption, and then all the crap that we eat, drink, breathe, or swallow, whether we want to or not, whether it's intentional. So the more we can be clean about our life and the chemicals we put on our skin or in our makeup or how we clean our house or the air fresheners we have in our car, our hobbies. Even right now, I mean, I live in Portland, Oregon, and we have a massive wildfires. And so it's raining today, thank goodness. But I've had my air purifier running 24/7 because not only am I breathing in all the smoke, but I'm breathing in everything that got burned up. So plastics, treated wood, toxins, copper, all of that's
The glue,
in
all
the
that.
air.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I breathe it in and swallow it down, and it's up to my intestines. This is why 80%, 70% of our immune system is in our intestines, because everything we eat, drink, breathe, or swallow goes right through into the intestines. And so chemicals absolutely are a really big one. Lack of hydration, lack of fiber, lack of movement. Those women that are prone to constipation, they don't have a bowel movement every day. That just sits there. And when it just sits there, it can also reabsorb, right? You can reabsorb stuff you don't want to back into your system. Stress, believe it or not, stress greatly affects our immune system. It greatly affects our mucus layer in our intestines. It greatly affects the way our intestines work. Some women get stressed out and they get constipated. Other women get stressed out and they have loose stools. And so we know it's inherently tied right there to our gut.
Right.
When it comes to that kind of health. And then just even like people who've traveled a lot and maybe, or camping, like outdoorsy folks, have you, maybe parasites, maybe candida, maybe you've got some ride-alongs in your gut that some bad bacteria that you just didn't know. You got food poisoning 5 years ago and, you recovered, but you've sort of always had, now you kind of have a sensitive GI tract. Or you're prone to a GI stuff, more than you used to be. And food poisoning, depending what it's from, can cause quite an imbalance in the gut. And
Right.
why sometimes it's helpful to get testing and see what's going on.
Let's move a little bit into some solutions. So we've been talking about how things work, which I think is a really important, like you've just knocked it out of the park in terms of explaining things. So thank you.
Yeah.
So let's imagine, maybe a clinical picture, like there's a woman, maybe she's 43, 2 kids, she's complaining, she's feeling hormonal that's cyclically related, onset of her, and I'll just give you, and of course we're, to anyone that's listening, Dr. Jones is a doctor, but she's not your doctor, right? So she's going to, she's going to give recommendations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're cleared to go and do them, right? But just kind of getting a clinical picture in terms of what you might look like. Let's say, her menses is very heavy, the onset, lots of clotting. So there's evidence of some estrogen dominance relative to progesterone in the luteal phase of her cycle. We do the Dutch test. We see that she favors her 4-OH pathway versus her 2-OH pathway. Compt is like medium to slow. What would be like, maybe we can just start with like phase, like how would you,
where do I start?
what do we do? So
what do we do? We actually start with the intestines. So we talk about it, right, as 1, 2, 3, but we treat it as 3, 2, 1 because it's the same exact thing in your house. If your bathtub is clogged, you're going to first focus on, well, maybe if your sewer line is clogged, let's say that. If your sewer line is clogged, you can turn the bath water on, off, you can dribble it, trickle it, you can filter it. It doesn't matter what you do with your bath water. If your sewer line is clogged, you're going to have an overflowing bathtub. Same for your drain. So we always unclog. We always get the intestinal health rolling first, and then we back up to the COMT, and then we back up to the 2, 4, and 16 pathways. Okay. Now I get asked, can I do all 3 at the same time? Absolutely. 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 We can be working on your gut health with, we're doing, stool testing, but there is, I'm adding more fiber into your diet. I'm adding things like ground flax seeds and making an inulin and prebiotics, sauerkraut and things like that. And maybe even probiotics, depending on the person. I'm adding things. There's a supplement called calcium deglucarate. And what it does is it keeps the box and the bow intact. It doesn't really address the cause, but it does help keep estrogen being excreted while you're working on the cause, which is really nice. You do have to be careful. You do get some calcium. So some people have written me and said, for whatever reason, I can't do calcium, or I have, parathyroid hormone problems. I can't do calcium. I'm like, oh, you can't do the supplement then. Be careful. So then we back up to COMT. So now we're like, what do I do for COMT? I'm like, all right, let's get you replenished. Let's supplement you with things like magnesium. Let's see if you have other nutrients that are out of balance, like zinc, and let's test your B12, and let's address your folate. Let's get a little choline in. Let's address, you do eat eggs, are you eating all
with the yolk?
I was going to say with the yolk, right?
Yolk, yes.
Because these are really helpful for clearing out estrogen. And then we back up to the 2-4-16. And this is where with diet, we're looking at your brassica family, which are your broccoli, your kale, your cauliflower, your Brussels sprouts. And they contain an ingredient called I3C, indole 3-carbinol. And when indole 3-carbinol hits your stomach acid, it breaks apart into a lot of things. The main thing you want is called DIM, diindole methane. And what DIM does is it redirects your pathway down to the 2 pathway. So it redirects away from the 4 and away from the 16 down to the 2. And that's what makes it really nice. Now, some people might go, well, I have really poor stomach acid. I don't digest very well. So then you may consider things like hydrochloric acid, bitters, lemon water, apple cider vinegar, when you're eating these foods. You may also supplement with digestive enzymes, or maybe you'll just skip the indole 3-carbinol part and take the supplement DIM, take diindole methane, and the problem is solved for that. Not for your digestion, but at least for your estrogens. And so that can be really helpful.
Do you recommend doing the DIM, like pulsing it through the cycle, or there's certain times, or does it really depend on the patient, or they take it all the way through?
Really depends on the patient. So what's cool about Dutch is we have a particular test called the cycle mapping, which is where you test almost every day of your cycle. And I like it for women who say, not only do I have PMS, but I also have terrible ovulation time. And I'll go, all right, let's see what's going on. And if they have, you're supposed to have a high estrogen peak at ovulation, but some women, shoot for the moon and make a lot, right? They're definitely those like type A go-getters when it comes to their estrogen. So I'm like, all right, let's do some DIM there. And then let's do some DIM as we get closer. So I will pulse it depending on her symptoms. If she says, look, as I get to day 25, I'm a mess. My breasts are big. I'm bloated. I feel terrible. And then my periods are heavy. I have lots of clots. I'm like, all right, let's focus at the end. Let's do some of these supplements closer to the end while we're working on diet, lifestyle, nutrition, chemicals, stress, sleep, all through the cycle.
And can we contrast DIM with sulforaphanes for a moment? Because I think that they're often put in this, they're like, oh, they all come from the brassica family, so they must all do the same thing. So let's first what are the differences between the two?
So sulforaphane is my favorite. I take it every single day because of just my risks with my genetics. So not full-grown broccoli, but broccoli sprouts. So the true little broccoli sprouts, they contain an ingredient called glucoraphanin. And when you eat broccoli sprouts, when you chomp them or when you cut them up, they form sulforaphane. So glucoraphanin magically interacts with something called myrosinase, and that forms sulforaphane. Basically, it's a big fancy word, and what it does is it upregulates COMT. And it takes the 4, if it's going down the wrong pathway, headed towards DNA damage, which is called a quinone with a Q, and it redirects it. Or it upregulates certain genes like a glutathione gene and another fancy gene called quinone reductase to properly excrete it. And so I like broccoli sprouts, either grow them yourself, which I've started doing, and putting them in my smoothies and my salads.
They're so cheap to grow yourself.
They're so cheap, and they're so easy. I had no idea. Well, I buy it from a particular company that makes it super easy. Because again, I don't grow things well. But I'm changing that storyline of mine. So, or you can take it as a supplement. Now, if you take it as a supplement, if you take sulforaphane as a supplement, the problem is a lot of companies are using that. You'll see in the ingredient label, it'll say sulforaphane glucosinate, and it'll be hyphenated, sulforaphane glucosinate. It is to me, deceiving word, because really what it is glucoraphanin. but you need the myrosinase. That's the
Right.
magic enzyme that magically converts everything. So what the companies are doing when they do that is they're hoping your gut microbiome will make the conversion for you into sulforaphane. So it's skipping the myrosinase step, and it's just hoping your microbiome does it. But the research I've read says, well, our microbiome is not great, and it's pretty variable amongst people. So there's no guarantee how much sulforaphane you're going to yield out of it. I may get 1 milligram and you might get 10.
Right.
So I prefer companies that actually tell you, like they put broccoli sprouts with this much myrosinase, and this is the yield of sulforaphane they're hoping to get. Those are the
Could you
companies
take
that I
mustard
like.
seed? Could you take like mustard seeds along with it if you have if you have
If
a
you can,
bottle?
especially, well, and you can, yeah, you could,
Like anything,
kind
so mustard
kind of a
seeds
lot.
for the listener. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And some people will use with their broccoli sprouts, they will pour a little mustard seed on top,
Right.
for extra added bonus. I don't do that. I love mustard, but I don't know, convenience, laziness. I just chop
The
up or chew
broccoli
up.
sprouts are always going to be your, like whatever, Mother Nature really wanted it to be. That's
Yep.
always going to be your best bet. And, for a moment, it's better than broccoli as well. So we
Yes.
may be hearing us talk about broccoli sprouts. I'm like, oh, well, I have broccoli. Yes, broccoli is great. Nobody's saying anything otherwise, but broccoli sprouts are orders of magnitude better in terms of the amount of
Yep.
glucoraphanin that is going to be there. And then as you're chewing, as you were saying, you're going to be now converting it into much more sulforaphane.
Yeah.
It's like 10 times the amount.
Yep.
I don't know the
Yep.
exact number, but it's something like that.
It's significant. And that's way different from DIM. So DIM from broccoli, or indole 3
Right.
carbinol, pushes things to your 2 pathway. So they both affect estrogen, just 2 different ways.
Right.
And you can take both. I have women say, can I do both? Can I take, like my doctor suggested I take DIM and sulforaphane. Is that safe? Yeah. Yeah, it's safe. If that's what your doctor wants you to do, you can take them together. They do different things.
Right. Good. You see why I wanted to start off with estrogen, because it's
Yes.
so
There's
complicated, so much to discuss.
Yeah.
I wanted to shift gears, if we can, move up one level in the hormonal chain of command, if you will, and talk about androgens, because this can also be a source of frustration and confusion for women, because people assume that we don't make testosterone, and of course we have to. Of course we do. And this comes up a lot in when we get to it, we'll talk a little bit about resistance training, because I'm always like, you got to lift heavy. You got to lift heavy, heavy, heavy. And so many women are like, but aren't I going to turn into I'm going to look a guy? And it's like, you know what? Even if you wanted to, it's not possible. But let's start with androgens, testosterone being one of them. Where do androgens come from? I know we talked about estrogen, the adipose tissue, the ovaries. Where are androgens made in the body?
So the 2 main androgens we talk about all the time are testosterone and DHEA. So testosterone is made roughly 20-25% made in the ovaries, roughly 20-25% made in the adrenal glands, and then the rest also made in the fat tissue. DHEA comes in 2 forms. DHEA-S, S is the sulfated form, that is 100% made in your adrenal glands. DHEA no S, 80% roughly made in your adrenal glands, 20% made in your ovaries. So again, your ovaries are really important. Now we bring in the adrenal gland health, and then again, fat tissue can also take what's in circulation and convert it into testosterone, and then further on into estrogen. So this is why women who struggle with adrenal issues, or women who struggle with ovarian issues, or even like think perimenopause, menopause, is they're losing their ovarian function like they used to have, their androgen production is going down as well. And they're noticing it, and it sucks.
So what are some, I want to talk about perimenopause and menopause in a moment. If someone has excess androgens, so if someone, and there's a couple of different, this is very complex, but if this is why I wanted you to on here to talk about it. What are some maybe clinical signs, like something that a woman might be noticing where she's like, maybe I am not converting my testosterones to my estrogens appropriately, or my testosterone is converting to dihydrotestosterone, which is what I call super T, right?
Yep.
Super testosterone,
Yep.
which is much more potent than testosterone. What are some of the clinical signs that someone might present with, where in your differentials you might say, okay, maybe she has some androgen excess here?
Yeah. So the big key ones we think of, like cystic acne, especially along the jawline and underneath the chin, down the neck. We think of hair growth in places you don't want, which is called hirsutism. And I'm not talking about the like stray, tree branch that we all get on our chin and have to pluck out and it's awful. I'm talking about like women are like, I'm actually developing maybe coarser, darker hair on the chin or down my neck or around my nipples, along my belly button, and it's getting worse. And it's usually coarser and darker. So we have the peach fuzz hair, right? That's just sort of lighter, and then we have that coarse dark hair. We start to think about male pattern baldness in women. So they start to get thinning at the temples, but you can have sort of thinning all over. We start to think about mood changes. So they're maybe less patient, a little more angry, a little more aggressive, because androgens can do that in women. It can push them into a more angry and patient mood, quicker than the other hormones. And so those are kind of our keynotes: the acne, the hair growth, the hair, the mood. That's what we tend to think about. Now there's a condition, of course, polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, that the insulin-based PCOS embodies all of those symptoms, but you don't have to have PCOS to have high levels of androgens. They can be separate.
So just like estrogen metabolism, there's going to be some genetic influence here in terms of, what you prefer. And with the Dutch test, one of the things I love is you look at 5-alpha reductase activity.
Yeah.
So maybe let's explain to the listener what that is and how that's going to, determine how potent the testosterone is going to be.
So in order to make that super T that you talked about, that dihydrotestosterone, we use an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase. And 5-alpha reductase can be increased by insulin, so having high insulin in the body, high inflammation in the body if you're inflamed, and then high cortisol, so stress can be a big instigator there. And then what happens is testosterone becomes that DHT, which is considerably more potent at the what we call testosterone receptors. So they like turn on the receptors, tenfold compared to testosterone. So if you have a preference for 5-alpha reductase, and if you are making, as a woman, excessive amounts of DHT, then you're more likely to have all of those symptoms that we really don't want. Thankfully, we can use things naturally to and there's even medications to get you off that pathway and help reduce those symptoms.
What are some of those interventions?
So the most, like the medications a lot of people maybe are familiar with, is spironolactone, metformin, which is known as glucophage. Those are two that are often used. But from a natural standpoint, one, we're going to just first and foremost address the cause. So lower the insulin, lower the inflammation, address the stress. But then as a Band-Aid, the supplements that work similar are reishi mushroom, saw palmetto, stinging nettle root, not the leaf, but the root. There's another one called Pygeum africanum. A lot of times they'll add zinc into that mix. Zinc can be helpful. Zinc alone I don't find helpful at all, but it's often mixed into that group of herbs. You will oftentimes find this group of herbs in supplements called prostate support, prostate health, prostate whatever. And women will go, I don't have
one of those.
I know, like, did you get it wrong? I'm like, no, I know. It's like, it's I need the stuff inside.
Yeah.
It's same for men and women. It's same dose, same stuff. Men take saw palmetto, men take reishi mushroom. EGCG from green tea. EGCG is a big active ingredient of green tea. That can be really helpful as well. And so you'll see them in, a lot of mixes. So I tell women, like, just cover the label up.
Just cover the label up. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about berberine? Do you see, so metformin, one of the things that it does is there's many things it does, but it helps reduce insulin. Berberine is a much weaker form of it, but has been shown to mimic metformin, but, being a natural. Is that something that you ever recommend or see?
I do, especially if it's insulin related. So berberine and inositol, myo-inositol are the two big ones that I use for the insulin folks. Is a proven 5-alpha reductase decreaser. Mm-hmm. You don't see it in the literature very often. You see the other ones more. But if insulin insulin is the cause. If you're like, well, their fasting insulin's high, they're hyperinsulinemic, then berberine and even myoinositol, metformin, they're all going to help in a roundabout way because the driving force is insulin. So take away the driving force and your testosterone drops down.
So we have supplements, and then obviously in terms of nutritional intervention, it's going to be restricting your carbohydrates. And this is where I think women with PCOS, or just even if you don't have the label, as you mentioned, like even if you have a tendency towards androgen excess, you should also be having what I like to call a carbohydrate appropriate diet, where you are not having the donuts and the cookies and the chips and the crackers, ad libitum.
Soda.
The
fancy
soda,
coffee drinks, right? When so that's I think that now, especially in our society, there's I think the juice companies, all the fancy, it's pumpkin spice season, and then they add whip and they, and it's like, have you even looked at how much sugar
800
is in that?
calories and like 4,000 grams of sugar. Yeah.
I know. Like, that's not doing you any favors, like once in a blue moon, if you're just like, well, I just want to try, this unicorn drink they just came out with, it's covered in whipped cream.
Oh my God.
Okay, fine. But if you do it all the time and you can't figure out why your symptoms are getting worse, I'm gonna show you.
Right. And we know, of course, just like to kind of finish this talk about insulin, when you are having more carbohydrates, those break down obviously into glucose, and insulin. That's like the hormone pairing there. And when your insulin levels are high, your sex hormone binding globulin is inversely related to insulin. So if your insulin's high, SHBG is low. And then that obviously means that your testosterone is going to be able to run amok, right? Because SHBG is the binding hormone that basically, binds up testosterone and delivers it to the cell, rather than allowing it to sort of have a free for all and exert its influence on all cells on the way to its final destination.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
So let's talk, how is this different in menopause? So we've been kind of hinting at it a little bit, but what are the differences in estrogen and testosterone metabolism between a woman who's in her reproductive years and then someone who is not? And I want to just talk about the adrenal gland and the importance of the adrenals in perimenopause and menopause as well.
So perimenopause, I call reverse puberty. So if you remember everything it took to get you into puberty and to make hormones in the first place, in perimenopause, as we get closer to menopause, we're basically just reversing out of it. So instead of our ovaries starting to turn on, they're basically starting to turn off. And as a result, a lot of women feel chaos. They can feel symptoms that come and go. They can, feel symptoms they've never had before: hot flashes, night sweats, brain fog, joint pain, vaginal dryness, decreased libido, mood changes, skin changes, and then it can go away. And then, and they're like, oh, that was done. And then it'll come back. Maybe women will say, I was a very normal 28-day consistent girl, and now I've skipped 2 cycles. What, am I pregnant? What is going on? Or they'll come every 2 weeks. They're like, well, now I get my period all the time, and then it will go away. And so because it's a reverse puberty, because basically what's happening is the brain is trying to communicate effectively with the ovaries, like, hey, do your job, like do it consistently or follow the rhythm. And the ovaries are like, well, my follicle health isn't at what it used to be. Age and time take its toll. And not only that, I've been losing follicles this whole time. So the follicles contain the cells that make the hormone. And as you're losing that ability, you're losing the sheer amounts that you used to make. And then we hit menopause, and in menopause, all our numbers, our estrogen, our progesterone, sort of, drop pretty low. They drop to what we call a menopausal range, because we don't have the cycle anymore. We've stopped bleeding. We don't get a period. We've stopped cycling. So we kind of get these low flatline hormonal numbers as we go through menopause. So metabolism, our detoxification, doesn't actually change. It's just the amount of water that comes in that is changing. So what used to be, waterfall, now sort of is more like a hopefully steady trickle.
And then what is the importance here now of the adrenal gland specifically? Because now
they're everything.
Yeah.
They're everything. And the thyroid as well. I think it's really important, women going into perimenopause and menopause. If you haven't had your thyroid checked in a while, have your thyroid checked, because your ovaries, your adrenals, and your thyroid, they're kind of like like a 3-legged stool holding you up. I mean, all the other glands are super important too, but As your ovaries start to stop making hormones like they used to be, unfortunately, we don't know as women when we're going to go through menopause. Like we're not born with like a preprint date that's like, like menopause, May 1st on your 55th birthday. Like, oh,
Wouldn't that be
that'd
great?
be
Oh
great.
my
Like,
God.
okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Like, I can be prepared.
Yeah.
But so none of the other glands know either. The thyroid doesn't know, the adrenals don't know. And all of a sudden the ovaries are just like, I'm not going to work this month. I'm not going to do it. I can't do it this month. And then the adrenals and the thyroid are like, where's the ovary? Like, what's going on? And so it puts more strain on those other glands in the body. It puts more strain on the pancreas. It puts more strain on everything else and how we process stuff. And so I tell women, as we get into perimenopause and then in menopause, like thyroid and adrenal health are in glucose, insulin, pancreas health are so critically important, because they're going to be the ones that then pick up the slack and make hormone and help you continue to feel good and support your body. But what we find is a lot of women enter into perimenopause, they enter into their 40s kind of a stressed out mess, like they're maybe, depending on when they started in life, maybe they have little kids then they're entering into perimenopause, or maybe they have kids entering high school or entering into college or university. And so it's big transitions for women.
Aging parents.
Aging parents is another big one. When women are in their 40s and early 50s and their parents are, maybe struggling with their own health issues. 40s and 50s, common time for divorce, common time for big transition, common time that women have hit, they're kind of, riding the wave of their career if they are in, career life. And oh, by the way, now they have to go through reverse puberty. It's like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who designed this? And not all women experience terrible
Who did
menopause.
design this? Who freaking did design this?
I'm having a conversation with that person. You better believe me. I think a lot of women are like ready to talk to that person or whoever group decided that.
Yeah.
And I know women, there are obviously women that have great menopauses. Like they're like, I have really no issue, was not a big problem. And I'm like, that's fantastic. We're not talking to you. I mean, in this
we love you, but this is not for you.
Exactly.
Yeah,
like you're still in the group. You're just,
you can sit with us, but we're just talking about a different
subject. But tell us what you did. Like bottle it up and sell it. You'll be rich. It's the women who are just really struggling because they're missing out on the key glands that are supposed to be making key hormones consistently, and instead they're not. So the other glands are like, I don't have the bandwidth either. Like, are you serious? Okay. And that's why women in menopause start to notice it's a big change for thyroid. It's a big change for cortisol. It's a big change for glucose and insulin. And they gain weight and they, experience all these symptoms that they didn't used to experience before. They'll say things like, I have the same diet and same exercise plan. What is the problem? Like everything's the problem. Like, unfortunately, it's a complete endocrine chaotic movement.
It's mayhem.
Yeah. So I advocate to women who are listening, and anyone who's listening, I'm like, you need to start on the self-care now. You need to start there, sooner the better.
What does that mean? What do you mean by
you want to prepare for menopause? Like start in your 30s. I'm like, because it's my girlfriend. I'm 43. So I'm 43, and my two of my best friends are 43. One of my other best friends 44. So we're like right there, and we all sometimes we'll text each other like, was it hot last night? Did anyone else have hot flashes? Like, what is this about? Yeah. So self-care just really means, because women generally are givers, and we can multitask. Generally, we are known we can multitask. We are givers. We are caretakers. We are the organizers, not always, but often. And as a result, we can do a lot. We make the babies. Like, we can do a lot, and we can handle a lot. We can take on a lot. Our bodies are generally built to be resilient. That's why we can get sick and still manage our life and our house and our job. And then our maybe male partners get sick and it's detrimental.
Right. They get a man cold.
Or they get a man cold, right. And so it is literally biological. We have different immune systems than men do.
Right.
Which is why we are more prone to autoimmune as women. But so what I tell women is, I need you to rank yourself higher. I need you to start saying no. Use your no button. I need you to set your boundaries. I need you to not feel guilty when you need to take time for yourself. I need you to take time for yourself. I need you to do the things that make you happy and fulfill you, and and do it regularly. Because if you don't ever get any rest, if you don't ever get any, downtime, if you're always pushing, then you're always going to be in that fight or flight, and that's depleting and that's exhausting. And
Yes.
we can do it for a long time. We've all done it for a long time. It's why we could stay up 24 hours in college or university and still, attend all our lectures and then do it again. And, because we were way more resilient when we were younger. And then like now the thought of me going to bed past 10:30 is awful. I'm like,
Oh,
whoa,
it's yeah, no.
what?
It's so funny. I'm like, wow, I used to really be able to punch out. I think
Yeah.
all-nighters. I would wake up the next morning at 5 and go and teach a fitness class
Yeah.
before my classes started. Yeah. There's no way I can do that now.
And so I'm telling women, like I'm sorry, like literally your body is telling you you need to slow down, stop and slow or rest, not stop, just rest and do it
Or
regularly.
just foot off the gas, right? It's just like, and I talk about this in the context of the nervous system. I'm so happy you're saying this because I think that we become, over time, we forget how to slow down. We forget how productive resting actually is. Like you think about this in the context of weightlifting, all your gains happen when you rest. All of them. You are ripping the muscle apart when you're training. That's not where your gains happen. The gains happen when you repair, when you slow down, when you sleep, when you take a couple of days off. Like you don't do legs every single day. There's a reason why you don't do that, because you need to be able to recover. So I love what you're saying. And I think that it's such an important message that we have to hear multiple times. And this, I can, get on my soapbox and like philosophical about culture and how we're always told to like smile on the face and heels on and careers on, and the kids are perfectly attended to, and there's a home cooked meal on the stove. And like we are at that, we ask of ourselves in society. And I think we internalize these messages so much. We ask too much of ourselves that push beyond the finite capacity of our matter. And I think when you are always pedal to the metal, when your foot is always down on the gas, you forget what it's like to say, okay, I'm just not going to have 400 things on my to-do list today. And I'm going to go walk, and I'm going to go for a walk, maybe listen to a podcast or call a friend or, whatever it is. So thank you.
And not feel guilty, right? That's the other thing. And not feel guilty. I was reading a social media influencer who was very honest in all of her approaches to life. And she said, I actually texted my sister and said, give me permission to sit on the couch on Sunday and watch Netflix all day. And her sister was like, these are the 16,000 things you have just done, like in the last 2 weeks. Like, you don't have a choice. You have to lay, on the couch and watch Netflix, and it's okay. Like, it's 100% okay. And I think when you are maybe type A or a doer, or you're used to doing all the time, your to-do list never gets done, then you feel guilty, and it feels hard to say, I don't have time to sit on the couch and read. I don't have time to put my feet up for a couple of minutes. I don't have time to enjoy this coffee outside or this tea, or to go for this walk, or to, do a little meditation, because have you seen my to-do list? And I'm like, but it's the to-do list that's the problem. It's the to-do list. I know we all have them. I'm not debating that at all.
And they never go away, by the way.
Ever.
Like, you'll never get through it. Like, that's the other thing. As soon as you finish one thing, another thing pops up. So I love that you're saying this, because it's, and I would say to that influencer, whoever she is, like the ultimate goal there would be for her to be able to give herself the permission to be able to recognize the 10,000 things that she did. And then with grace and love directed towards herself, say, you know what, girl, it's time to reward yourself by watching whatever on Netflix or whatever she wanted to do. And I think that that's something that I personally struggle with as well. Like, I'm here saying, like, you have to give yourself the permission. And I still, I struggle. It's like, it's so easy for me to dole out the advice. Right. But it's hard for me too, because I'm like, oh, I gotta grow the podcast. I got to do this. I'm writing the book. I got to get this done. And it's like, no, you will be so much more useful to yourself, to your career, to your business, to your family, to your children, when you are well rested. And for me, the big thing is like, it's usually around 4:00 every day. And I notice myself, I have like 500 tabs open on my computer, and I'm just switching aimlessly between them. I'm like, time for yoga. Now it's time for me to get up, step away from the computer, get some movement in, and then I can kind of ease into the evening with the kids and whatnot. So thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah. Well, I'm just as guilty. Trust me. I definitely have, F it moments, screw it moments. Like, that's it. I'm not doing anything. I'm stopping. And then other days I'm like, no, I have to stay up till 10 and get this project done. And my husband is like, what are you doing? Like, you're doing nobody any favors. Like, don't listen to me.
It's like, go to my Instagram.
I know.
tell people to rest all the time. Okay. I know.
Yes.
I appreciate that. I think that this, I had wanted to talk about cortisol and the mitochondria. I want to talk about cholesterol, but I feel like this has been so dense for people. So I think I would love to wrap this up here. And then if you are open to it, I'd love to bring you on for round 2.
Absolutely.
And we can do a deep dive into cortisol, HPA axis, all the things we can talk about. I've had Ari Witten on the podcast, and we talked about air quotes adrenal fatigue. So I'd love to talk about all of those things.
Yes. Yeah.
But if people wanted to, this has been so useful, and your Instagram is so amazing. Can you tell people where they can find you if they want to learn more about the Dutch test? Like, tell everybody all the things.
All the things. Instagram is where I hang out. It's at dr.carriejones. And then for the Dutch test, it's www.dutchtest.com. And all the videos, all the podcasts like this one are up for free. You don't have to be a Dutch signed up person. You can just click through and learn as much as you want and listen to the podcasts and learn about hormones. And then of course, learn about Dutch.
And then, so you can also, obviously practitioners can order the Dutch, but also people can order the Dutch from your website directly. Is that correct?
People can order directly from the website. We don't recommend it because it is 6 pages of really dense information, as you know. Really and so we'd much prefer people have a practitioner to know which test to order and then how to interpret it. So the people who do order it on their own, I'd say the large percentage come back and go, wow, that was a lot. Can you refer me to a practitioner who can read this test? Sure. So we do that as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, this has just been such a pleasure, such a treat. The internet worked today.
Yes, thankfully.
So, I'm so happy. And we'll have you back for round 2, and we'll do another geeky magic carpet ride and some other cool stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I'm excited.
Thank you.
Dr. Stephen Gundry is the video that's coming up next for you. Just click right here. We're talking about the microbiome, energy, postbiotics, mitochondria, and how to get your energy back.
Continuous ketosis, 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year is really dumb.